You're listening to an event from the U.S. Institute of Peace, part of the USIP podcast network. For more information about our work around the world, visit usip.org and check us out on social media.
My name is Lise Grande. I'm the head of the United States Institute of Peace. We were created by the U.S. Congress in 1984 as a public, nonpartisan institution dedicated to helping prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict abroad. We want to thank everyone for joining us today for this very important conversation on the frontline civilian response in Sudan and the critical role it is playing in saving lives and advancing the localization agenda. What's happening in Sudan is heart-wrenching. 7 million people have been displaced from their homes since last April, making Sudan the world's largest displacement crisis today. 25 million people need humanitarian assistance in order to survive. There's horrific violence against women. The U.S. Secretary of State has condemned members of the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces for committing war crimes in Sudan. And in the case of the RSF and its allied militias, the Secretary has condemned them for committing crimes against humanity and for ethnic cleansing. The Chief Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court has briefed today the UN Security Council on the war crimes that are being committed in Darfur. We're here today to talk about one of the most extraordinary efforts underway globally, involving tens of thousands of Sudanese civilians who are at the forefront of initiatives to save people, to end the fighting, and to protect civilians. Brave, determined, generous, resilient Sudanese across Sudan are organizing emergency response rooms and mutual aid groups. These groups are providing food and safe passage, medical care, and basic needs under unimaginable circumstances. It's truly an honor to welcome the extraordinary panelists and representatives from the mutual aid groups and from the emergency response rooms who are going to be joining us for today's discussion. First, I hope everyone joins us in welcoming the USAID Administrator, Ambassador Samantha Power. She is one of the most important global champions of frontline humanitarian workers and the localization agenda. The administrator is here to speak with us about the Sudan crisis and the heroic work that is being done by Sudanese humanitarians and civil society. Madam Administrator.
Thank you so much, Lise, for that introduction, for all of your service, and for using this incredible institution to convene on some really cutting-edge issues and to broaden awareness of what is happening out there in the world in the negative, but also these forces of light that we have gathered with us today that are putting so much on the line on behalf of their brothers and sisters in Sudan. Welcome as well to Sara Pantuliano from the Overseas Development Institute, who has applied her considerable expertise to supporting the Sudanese people's dreams of freedom and democracy for more than, I think, 2 decades now and counting. Welcome to Kholood Khair, who for years has been a steadfast champion of the Sudanese people and who has helped represent the views of Sudanese youth in politics using a very unique platform. Just before we start, I would just say that I'm in awe of the individuals that we have gathered here today and that we'll have a chance to hear from local Sudanese responders who have flown all the way from Sudan to join us. I'm sure it was not an easy journey. Nothing in Sudan these days is easy. It was, I'm sure, stressful also in those you leave behind and worry about while you are apart. But it really matters for us to hear from you directly and to have your voices injected into deliberations here about how we can all do better, in a sense, learning from your example. So thank you. The conflict in Sudan, I think we all know, Lise spoke to this, is a human catastrophe, and it is one that is getting worse by the minute. The Sudanese Armed Forces, the Rapid Support Forces, and the countries supporting them are pushing Sudan toward state collapse. Estimates show that 25 million people, more than half of Sudan's total population, are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. And as armed militants commit unspeakable atrocities and war crimes across the country, and the Rapid Support Forces carry out ethnic cleansing again in Darfur, millions of Sudanese civilians are living in terror, fearing for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. In the face of all of this staggering need, Sudan continues to present some of the toughest conditions for humanitarian access in the entire world, and that is saying something. Rampant insecurity, ill-disciplined or rapacious forces on both sides, bureaucratic obstructionism mastered through decades of practice at being obstructionist, using red tape and bureaucracy. All of this and more is preventing aid organizations from operating within large parts of Sudan, forcing some to lay off Sudanese staff or withdraw from the country entirely. Global funding for the crisis remains shockingly low, at less than half of estimated needs, even as the humanitarian crisis continues to intensify. Unconscionably, I mean, everything I've described is unconscionable, but unconscionably, supplies are actually there, stuck at the border or in the port of Sudan, as permits to move aid into the country continue to be denied. And the fact that a permit could stand in the way of supplies reaching people with life or death needs and conditions is horrifying. But in the face of these impossible circumstances and taking tremendous personal risk, Sudanese civilians, like the ones we will hear from today, are springing into action to support one another. Days after fighting broke out, on April 15th, hundreds of volunteers organized themselves on WhatsApp and Facebook to deliver aid and support to communities first in Khartoum and then across the country. Many of them are young people, some barely out of school, but they have spent the last 10 months getting life-saving assistance to communities, often to their own friends and neighbors, but communities caught in the crossfire. And in the months since April 15, they have not wavered in their commitment as well to each other, even as the bombardments continue and arbitrary arrests become more frequent, even as aid workers and critical supplies remain stuck at the borders, even as the horrors they are experiencing don't always break through news cycles abroad. These volunteers embody the Sudanese spirit of Nafir, the call to band together to support one another in times of disaster and struggle. We have seen the impact of such networks across Sudan for decades, but today, as access to Sudan for humanitarians remains intermittent, they have formed the backbone of the response to Sudan's humanitarian crisis. Indeed, these volunteers are among the few groups able to reach many Sudanese communities in need, especially in Khartoum. You will again hear directly from a few of these courageous and patriotic individuals in a moment, but to build on Lisa's comments, I'd like to highlight some of their work. Some volunteers are collecting supplies of food and clean water, preparing hot meals to distribute to people in need. Others are arranging accommodation for displaced communities or organizing evacuations for those fleeing violence. Still others are helping families retrieve the bodies of their lost loved ones, arranging burials so that they can properly say goodbye. As attacks continue on medical infrastructure and health workers across Sudan, volunteers are helping meet urgent health needs in their communities. They are procuring medicine, distributing bed nets to prevent malaria, organizing public awareness campaigns to fight the spread of cholera, and providing medical transport services for pregnant mothers or mothers in labor. These volunteers are, of course, critical to helping Sudan survive this immediate crisis and the immediate terror. But these individuals, these networks, are also the key to building a better future for the country. The response networks that they run are decentralized, with little hierarchy and largely horizontal leadership. They are wide-ranging and localized, with direct access to communities that can help them identify and respond to the needs of the most marginalized. They model the kind of governance, democratic, equitable, people-centered, that Sudanese communities have long craved. But they also face tremendous risks from outbreaks of fighting, risks from raids or bombs, or from armed groups directly targeting them or their families. To reduce the risk of being bombed, in fact, some organizations have created no permanent office and have no permanent location. They just have to move around and stay ahead of those who would come after them. And nearly 10 months after the start of the conflict, funding for these local responders remains woefully inadequate. The fact that they are often small and informal means that they are largely passed over by mainstream aid sources. Even with our broad prioritization of working directly with local partners or of localization, it took USAID far too long to get aid flowing to these groups and networks. And while diaspora communities have stepped up admirably to send resources directly to these local organizations, that kind of funding cannot match the resources of bilateral development agencies like USAID or international aid organizations with multi-billion-dollar budgets. If these relief networks were to collapse, millions of Sudanese civilians would be left with no assistance at all. To prevent that from happening, these groups need more resources. The United States remains the largest humanitarian donor for the crisis in Sudan, but we know our funding is nowhere close to meeting urgent needs on the ground. We are working hard to commit more funding to these local groups, aided by our partners on the ground, both Sudanese and international. We will continue these efforts, hope to scale them up, and we call on other governments and aid organizations to do the same. At the same time, we have seen firsthand the challenges that aid organizations again face in dispersing aid to local organizations at the speed and the scale that this crisis requires, but also with the safeguards we all use to confirm that funding is going to organizations that are trustworthy, operational, and effective. We welcome greater discussion on ways that USAID and other aid organizations can improve our processes so that we can meet the capacity needs of local organizations and communities on the ground. Together with multilateral organizations and our government partners, we also have to get at why these challenges exist in the first place. In other words, we have to increase pressure on both sides to lift the barriers preventing us from fully responding to the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. Barriers like denied visas and permits for staff and supplies, closed roads, preventing aid workers from reaching the vulnerable and the affected, and intensifying violence that endangers both civilians and staff. The free flow of aid is essential, as is the ability of both international organizations and the brave Sudanese frontline responders to deliver it. It is also, of course, the case that we can't just look at the humanitarian symptoms of a war that shouldn't be happening at all. And that is the most important contribution that the United States and other large influential actors on the global stage need to be pursuing, which is, of course, a diplomatic process, a peace process that brings an end to a war that, for as long as it happens, is going to bring about terrible suffering, even alongside the incredible bravery and courage of the Sudanese people. In marveling at the resilience and courage of civilians, and in seeing civilians step up into leadership roles along the lines of what we're discussing today, we can never take that bravery for granted. We have to take inspiration from their leadership and exercise leadership ourselves. It can be easy when faced with news of atrocities and closed borders and obstructionism to feel paralyzed, like nothing will truly fix the situation, or like a political deal is miles off. But today, really, here and now, we can all do something that does make a difference. We can adopt the spirit of Nafir ourselves and band together to support the Sudanese people in their time of need. Thank you so much, and thank you again for the work that you are doing and that of your colleagues. Thank you so much.
Well, our thanks to Administrator Power for her remarks today and for her leadership on this really important question. I now have the privilege to introduce the panelists who will share with us today their perspectives, their experiences, their stories, their priorities, and I think their call to action of what it is that they're looking for the international community to do to activate, to stand in solidarity with their work. My name is Susan Stigant. I'm the director of the Africa program here at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Thank you for those who are joining us in person and those who are joining online. Allow me first to introduce our panelists. We're joined by two colleagues who have come from Sudan. Omima Omer is joining us from the Khartoum emergency response rooms. And Abuzar Osman is joining us from the Darfur emergency response rooms. We're also joined by Kholood Khair, one of the leading analysts on Sudan, the Horn of Africa, Sara Pantuliano, executive director of ODI, and longtime friend and humanitarian practitioner of Sudan. So if I may start, we've heard quite a bit about what's taking place in Sudan, and I know many people who are joining us today follow the conflict closely. But Kholood, I wanted to invite you to outline a little bit of the context and the priority dynamics that are taking place and the context in which the emergency response rooms are working.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everyone for being here. At the outset, I'd like to say that I don't think I've ever been prouder to be on a panel than I am with these two and the amazing work that they've been doing, because, you know, quite truly it is one of the most remarkable things we've seen in terms of a response to a conflict of this scale. And in terms of, you know, sort of the lay of the land in the country, I think we can all see that it's getting, you know, increasingly worse. And one of the things that is, I think, very remarkable about the conflict in Sudan is that it is the capital that was hit first, and it's the capital of a very centralized state. And so state collapse is happening quite literally right in front of our eyes, which means that any kind of things we could have depended on, for example, in other contexts, like having some level of governmental effort, like having some kind of centralization of aid, etc., is completely gone. And so it is exactly the decentralization, for example, of groups such as the ERRs and other local responders that makes it so effective. And one of the things that we're looking at in the very near future is very, very heightened famine-like conditions. And that's something that I think we need to get ahead of very, very quickly. The other thing to say is that we're not seeing an end to this conflict anytime soon. I think that's something we have to, use as the basis of every analysis that we have. And so what kind of investments do we need to make right now that will serve us not just until this war is over, which could be, God knows when, but also in the future, for Sudan that is yet to be made, that is still in the making. And quite frankly, that is precisely in groups like this, who are not just working on providing services where there is no state, or providing services where there is no international humanitarian architecture, but also really sewing together the social fabric of Sudan that this war has ripped apart. And that's I think one of the key contributions that they make beyond the humanitarian. We shouldn't look at them purely as humanitarian actors, though they definitely play that role, but as the building blocks of this kind of Sudan that we would all like to see.
Thanks, Kholood. We often hear these phrases about the social fabric being torn apart and the horrendous conditions that people are working under. But I think most of us in this room have the privilege of not fully understanding what that is. So Omima, I'd like to invite you to share a little bit. What does it look like day to day as you are working in the emergency response room in Khartoum, as you're living amidst this dynamic and very real conflict and violence?
Okay, first of all, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I feel so happy to share what we've been doing. And I think now we can realize the impact of what we're doing, which is what started as a tradition thing we've been doing, that it's ended up here. Well, just as a youth, I supposed to think about my future. What do I want to be? What's my career concerns, and so on. So that was all before the 5th of April. Of course, we've been just discussing about, what do you want to do? How's your life going? And then 5th of April happened, the war broke. Then we started thinking how we can save lives, how we can provide services in a context there's no one but us. As an ERR, waking up every day, knowing that you might not going to survive for the next day. Searching for resources to supply food for kitchens that laying in the neighborhoods. You might find them. We at the first few months there was like available. You can find the supplies for food and so on. But after that they were not. We had to walk miles in order just to find the food to provide a meal or two for the people at the neighborhoods. So we're spending a lot of time, just no transportation with a lot of risk on the streets. As they stated, we get attacked, we've been arrested, we've been targeted, and so on. Searching for food supplying, and after that providing it to the people, then to the kitchens actually been working there, and just provided the meal for those people. That's one of the first tasks. This is the basic task that we're doing at the early morning in the day. Then after that, visiting the hospitals and the clinic centers in order to provide services for the people there, for the patients' movements. We assist in delivering the services itself and delivering the medicine and so on. We have 2 issues with the basic services, which is electricity and water. Due to the attack and bombing, the stations been attacked hurriedly. They're no more working. Like having no electricity or no water is it's a daily event we're happening. Sometimes it took like a week, maybe 2 weeks. At some neighborhoods, it depends. All of hospitals right now working with fuels, so generators basically, because the electricity is not stable at all. It's just it depends on the place where you are. So to get the fuel, it's another story. We have to go on searching for the fuel. Maybe it's not available in Khartoum right now anymore. Like if you found the fuel, it would be luckier, and it's very expensive. And we are on a very, very tight budget. We're searching for this every single day in order to provide it for the basic services. The other thing that we're also trying to doing is we are trying to provide other services also, which is trying to create the spaces for kids in order just to talk about the war and what's happening, because there's no schools. The schools cut off. There's no schools working anymore in Khartoum. As a woman ERR, I would like also to state it to this: women are playing a very big role in the ERR in Khartoum war especially. They are responsible of the kitchen. Every day we have to cook the meals, we have to distribute the meals, and we are responsible of taking care of the kids and just trying to talk about them, trying to create a safe spaces for all those kids in order to talk to changing the situation. It's war. War is not a game. It's affecting everyone. It's affecting us. It affects every one of us. So women are playing a very, very certain role, trying just to cope with what's happening outside. And clearly this war is not going to end up not soon. That's what we can say. It's not going to end up soon, and we're still doing that every single day. Every single day we're waking up. We're being very happy with how many lives we can save today. We're just always stating like, oh guys, it's a challenge. Let's trying to save lives. Let's trying to provide services with this very tight budget. Like sometimes we had to choose either saving lives or providing foods. You would be lucky if you had 2 meals in a day. Would be very lucky. It was like a privilege to having 2 meals in a day. So we all do all these things. We continue and we will, because we're doing what we love. We're doing what's our identity. Just putting our life in danger is nothing besides saving lives. Because every day, when the day ends, we all gathered. We're just being very happy how many lives we save. We cried together. That's obviously. And as a person, personally, I attended the war in 2 states. So losing lovers, losing friends, being targeted. And all this, despite all this, with no resources, and it's getting worse because nowadays it's getting more worse than anything. Foods became a serious problem in Khartoum there, and there's no accessibility for anybody else or bodies in order to perform the humanitarian aid. We are the only one who are on the ground. We are the civilians. We're just youth, and we're doing all that things. So that's all what I would have said about what's going on.
Thanks, Omima. Abuzar, as I turn to you, I want to let people know that English and Arabic translation is available for those who are joining online, and also headsets in the room, English on channel 1, Arabic on channel 2. Abuzar, you're walking through these challenges in Darfur, and wanted to invite you to share a little bit about what does the day-to-day work, the day-to-day life look like?
Thank you very much. The sound is very low, the microphone. We can't hear the speaker. We apologize. The sound is very low. Thank you so much for all the responders. I would like to express my thanks. All the people that are saving lives of Sudanese, male and female, we are thankful to them. All of the responders, all of the people who are working very hard to build the future for Sudanese women and men are thanked and appreciated. We are very appreciative for all those who work very hard to save lives. If I have to say something, I'd like to express my fullest thanks to all those who work very hard to save those lives and those who work on the field. The daily life of a responder and the daily life of the people who work in emergency situations starts from the very beginning. We know that we need them. We know that we need to keep in mind that these people are very helpful and they work very hard in order to save life. The risks they are exposed are unspeakable, and they insist to build something for the people, for the community. And we know very well that the risks they are exposed to are big and great. The daily life of Sudanese people from 6 years up is very hard. We are trying very hard to save lives. The Sudanese youth may die overnight, from the revolution to the coup d'etat to all what happened. We know that it's very hard. These people need humanitarian aid. It's a non-stop movement, and we want peace to reign and to prevail in Sudan. We want Sudanese people to communicate with each other. We are talking here about a movement. We are talking about the civil society in Darfur, in Khartoum. The civil society is working very hard in Jabal and Nuda. We have a civil society in Kurdistan. Civil society is endeavoring in order to protect the life of Sudanese people, to guarantee a respectful and a decent life. So we are organizing ourselves and we are working very hard in order to save lives. We have to communicate, to coordinate. We have emergency rooms that are available. We need at every district an emergency room to deal with the situation. So we have in Khartoum 9 localities. We need those localities to coordinate with the emergency rooms, and they need to coordinate and work very hard in order to work hard to save the life of these people. We need coordination between all the localities in Khartoum. It is very important to have a system whereby they can understand the needs. There is a full understanding of those needs, and there is this conscience raising process. We need to know who needs help. We need to horizontally understand what's going on. We have local agenda to be understood. We want the interventions to happen where they should happen. And in addition to that, we need to organize ourselves and have those emergency rooms available at every district. This is the form that we need. We are in need of this system. We are learning bit by bit how we can ensure reforms, how we can, for example, have accountability, transparency in the process. We worked at Darfur, and we have a system that works there. We tried to replicate the same system. We had emergency rooms to share knowledge, to share experiences, and to share the dream that we are capable of managing and dealing with our problems in order to save our community. And we need to work, and we need to be represented. So Darfur was inspired from Khartoum. In Darfur, we don't have communication process. There were big issues that we had to deal with in some areas. In Darfur, there are no ways of communicating with one another. There is no system that's available for people to coordinate. So we had to borrow a system from Libya and be inspired from it in order to replicate and generalize that system. When we talk about accountability, we see that we have been able to develop systems that can work, systems that introduce us to what's going on the field. But we need to know how we can continue.
We need a financial report to everyone be trained centrally to know how to write a report and a financial request. And the thing is that when it's war going on and we need proper paperwork, that sometimes can be slightly confusing with the reality. And the thing is that to be able to build our movements, and what we need is that we have to understand what we might need to predetermine rather than being hit with the reality and then to determine what we need and find out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abuzar. It's amazing to hear how the structures build out of necessity, and the ideas of accountability and responsiveness and community-centered approaches are baked into what you're doing because there is really no other choice. Omima, I'd like to come back to you and what the emergency response rooms are doing in terms of a humanitarian response is incredible. And it also strikes me that there are some other impacts in terms of keeping people and communities connected together at a time when the social fabric is under such threat because of the war, because of the crisis, and because of what people are living through. Would you share some examples of where you see those other types of impacts and successes?
Okay, definitely. I'm just going to add what Abuzar stated there. Like the main purpose was like trying to fill in the gaps and provide services in war situation. But the ERRs like hidden and impact beyond the humanitarian need. Like the ERR work on the unity of the what we say of the social actors and social social layers. For example, I'm going to state it that in Darfur or in the Western Darfur, we know that the war there was like based on the ethnic based and so on and so on. When the ERR came there, now all of them, all those people from different ethnic background, the same ethnic that been fighting, they are now in the ERR. They're working together to filling these gaps, to trying to provide the needs and so on. As well as we're going to state it in Khartoum state example, we have the kitchens in each neighborhood. Those kitchens provide meals for people in the neighborhood. So all of the people in the neighborhood will come to one kitchen, cooking together, chatting, just having the meals together. So it's a sort of unity that's been developed. Also, the inclusivity, like ERR works with non-Sudanese people. We have refugees in Khartoum back there, and they are now staying there. We're providing services to them. They are part of the ERRs. They're working with the ERRs in order to provide those services. So the last thing, but not least, ERR works on the values. Like each volunteer in the ERR, you will find that he or she has a high level of commitment, accountability, and responsibility toward these things, because obviously, we will not be able to continue provide what we provide within the 9 months with this very tight amount of funding without having those values with us. So the ERR work on, like as you stated, it's a movement. It's a movement to unite the community and try just to allow the community to decide what's the best for community, how we can provide these services, and how we can even chapter those needs. So the ERR right now is not just about providing services, it's just about creating those services, those needs, and trying to shaping them. Learning, we evolve through learn. Like the first day for example, I'm just going to say the example. The first day we couldn't find the needs for the kitchen, for example. We need to have a meal and we had no needs. Then we discovered that some areas had a need and it's accessible. So the second day directly, I'm not going to search from zero. I'm going to start from the same area that I've been there yesterday. So it was like evolving. We learn through committing mistakes at the beginning. Of course, that's normal because it's come out of need. But right now we're more structured. We're working through the needs of the community, and also the relationship among us is like a grassroots thing, as you stated. So the ERR starting from the neighborhood level to locality level to states level. So this is how we're trying to keep connected, how we're trying to allow the others and the share of everything. We're sharing resources. So also we're sharing the highlighting or the identification of those specific needs. So this is what I would say about that point.
Thanks, Omima. It's always striking to me how in the midst of a terrible war, there can be pockets of peace that are so robust and that are so grounded. So thank you for sharing those examples. Kholood, Sara, I want to bring you into the conversation, and we've heard about the structures, the work that's taking place to respond. We heard about the international response, the funding that is not fully fulfilled, and I think the challenges of responding and connecting into these local initiatives. Sara, I'd love to hear your thoughts on are we collectively meeting this moment, and what would it take to do so?
I mean, the short answer is no, and then I can give a more elaborate answer. I mean, the crisis we're seeing in Sudan at the moment is a crisis of epic proportions. There is no two ways about it. And I think on the side of the so-called international community, it's one of epic failure, quite frankly, on different levels. First of all, political failure. I've worked in and on Sudan actually for 32 years. It's been 32 years since I first went to Khartoum. And I have seen what robust political engagement is, Ambassador Carson is here. We've seen, the engagement that we saw around the IGAD peace agreement. We've seen the engagement that has been around, the referendum that led to the independence of South Sudan. We've seen the global attention that Darfur commanded, in the early to mid-2000s. There were plenty of challenges, but nobody could have said that the world had turned a blind eye or had, sort of walked the other way. And then we saw in 2019 this incredible, peaceful, almost joyous, civil society revolution that sort of got rid of the military regime after so many years. And in many ways, the heroes of 2019 are the same, heroes that we're seeing today, really at the heart of the emergency rooms. But we failed them. We failed to support this civil uprising, the transition, to give them the political backing that they needed. The same way we're failing them now, because the political engagement is required today to challenge those who are enabling the crisis in Sudan. They are creating the crisis in Sudan. And then, of course, it's a humanitarian failure of epic proportions, because we've heard the extent of the humanitarian crisis. I actually think it's going to get worse and worse. We're seeing the number of IDPs growing everywhere, and obviously communities not being able, even through mutual aid, to support those who arrive. We know that there could be a serious food security crisis, because the same sort of areas that produce food in Sudan are obviously sort of at the heart of the fighting. And we've had so many meetings and events at ODI on Sudan, and discussing with colleagues that are responding on the ground, analysts like Kholood. We hear the same message over and over again. Business as usual in Sudan is not working. Even trying to channel more resources the usual way, through the international structures, is not working, is not reaching, is not getting there. And also I would add that that's not what we need, because it's not aid that is going through different layers, to the emergency room or the mutual aid efforts, because they're not there to implement what someone else has decided or designed. We've heard how deeply embedded these responses are, how accountable they are to the community, how accountable they are to one another. They know what is needed better than anyone else. And so it's not for us to design and task an international organization that then is going to give them the money to implement a certain project. Let's turn this on its head once, and for all. I mean, there is so much lip service to localization. What better way, to see people so deeply invested, putting their lives at risk, their freedom at risk, day in, day out, to try and support their peers. And to be honest, I've worked in Sudan for so long, I've seen this also succeed in Sudan, because let's not forget that we've seen this level of mutual aid work very well in the Nuba Mountains, in South Kordofan, since the 90s, and even more so from 2011, where both through diaspora financing and through international financing, very careful, very politically informed, that has supported a local response that's been able to keep people alive, to protect them, to facilitate local peace building, in a way that has actually allowed people to stay in the area and remain alive, even though international organizations couldn't get there. So we need to be brave and creative, so that we can truly support what these courageous friends and colleagues are doing, and make sure that they feel that there is a set of international partners that are really, really committed to back them. Because if they weren't there, the situation would be a lot worse. If we don't support them, the situation will escalate to a point that we'll see what is now a crisis become a real tragedy, not just in Sudan but also in the region as a whole.
Kholood, there seems to be this narrative about the risk of doing things differently, or without the reporting structures that have been built for good reason over time, about the risks of diversion or the lack of accountability to international governments. And I wonder if you have any observations on that.
I do.
I knew you did.
I mean, I always find it strange when people say, we're worried about diversion of aid, or we're worried about the politicization of aid through the emergency response rooms. Guess what? Aid is political. It always has been. It will continue to be. And if you are comfortable giving a lot of money, for example, through the UN or NGOs who are forced to work with the Humanitarian Aid Commission, aren't able to get visas into the country, aren't able to get their products into the country from Port Sudan, and yet you don't think that's political. The Humanitarian Aid Commission was designed to capture aid. And so if you're happy to work through the Humanitarian Aid Commission, but you're worried about politicizing aid through the ERRs, I think that needs a massive rethink. At the same time, you have, the ERRs are here to say what we have is working. They're not here to say, we need your blessing to start. If you want to see something that is working, this is it. And it's working in a massive vacuum, not just a governance vacuum, but also an aid vacuum. I mean, you have a $2.6 billion envelope that is 40% funded. And most of that funding goes through the same old tired structures that are unable to get into the country, that are unable to deliver aid. How does that make sense? Why do we keep flogging a dead horse when actually there are very, very practical and value for money, dare we say, structures that are already working? They have accountability. Yes, they will have accountability to you as donors, but they have accountability to their communities. And that is far more of an incentive to stay true to the funding and the delivery of aid than anything that might be decided in DC or Brussels or Whitehall. And so you have these things inbuilt. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It already exists. And for the life of me, I can't imagine that it would take these people coming out of their very, very important life-saving work to have to come here to places like DC, like Europe, like elsewhere, to make this case when it should be blindingly obvious to everyone in this room that this is the way forward.
Can I add something really quickly?
Yes, of course.
The risk the aid is manipulated, stolen, diverted, is always there. It's not unique to the emergency room. It's not unique to Sudan. This happens in every crisis. And, as Kholood has said, we've seen aid stolen from international organizations, obviously visa restricted, access controlled. This is the reality of operating in these environments. I would say what we've heard, from Omima and Amuras, today, it inspires me a lot more in terms of the accountability that ultimately is so deep to the communities, is so embedded in making sure that peer groups will be monitoring, will be, Abdullah said it so clearly, mahalliya by mahalliya, locality by locality, it's so granular in a way that I've never seen international organizations delivering aid being able to have that level of accountability. That should give us the reassurance that actually if aid goes astray, well, we'll hear it pretty quickly from the communities themselves.
So this is the point in the event where now that we've made people a little uncomfortable in their chairs, that we focus on what is possible and the actions that are needed. And so, Abuzar, I want to turn back to you to really share what is needed from international partners, what actions, what support, what solidarity.
This is a question that I really love. I'd like to bring an example before answering the question.
المثال بتاعي إنه نحن في غرف الطوارئ في كل السودان في خرطوم في دارفور.
We are in Sudan, in Khartoum, and in Darfur, undergoing a situation. During these 8 months, or during these 9 months, we used $1 million from different donors. But I would like to tell you that the million or less than $1 million that we received from more than 11 different partners was an amount that could allow us to do a few things. You're hearing the statistics, you're hearing the numbers, and you know that ERs are are doing. In Sudan, we have opened more than 300 collective kitchens, so shared kitchens, more than 300 kitchens where meals are provided. We have worked with different centers. The people of this district meet at those kitchens. They share the same localities. So those kitchens were provided for food, to provide meals. And it was also an opportunity for people to get together, to sit together, and to sit with one another and exchange communications. $1 million could allow us to provide assistance for more than 200 IDP centers. So they benefited from the ER assistance directly and indirectly. 2 million Sudanese, in an indirect way, could benefit from this assistance. ERs, they have a kind of the coordination commission, and with the civil society, they can coordinate in order to try to identify the kind of interventions that are needed in this context. So increasing the capacity, for example, of ER responders. It's a way to, of course, provide this civil society to provide the necessary assistance at the ER level, because ERs are very important, and to understand also the context. The civil society in Sudan can intervene and can make the necessary interventions in order to assess, to evaluate the kind of interventions that are needed. This is what we've done with the $1 million that was donated. What we really need is that you take full responsibility during the ER assistance process. We want you to be experts at providing the assistance. We are partners with international community. We are partners. We feel your skills will allow us to learn from one another, will allow us to be in a decision-making process. And that means we can plan. That means that we feel we are partners in this context. We need to know what is needed at the local level. ER need special and direct assistance. I know that there are decision makers that are really, really present with us that can make making process. I know that you guys can help us. I know that you can intervene in order to benefit our local agenda and in order to help us. We know what happened in Syria, Lebanon. We need to know what's happening at the local agenda. And we really need that local agenda to be beneficial. The question is, what kind of support, what kind of assistance? Because in order for peace to prevail in Sudan, we really want you to intervene at the local level and to help in the decision-making process. Thank you.
Kholood, may I turn to you for your thoughts on concrete steps that could be taken by international partners to stand in solidarity and support this important work?
Yeah, and I think the important word there is solidarity. I mean, I feel like we're having the same conversation we had about the resistance committees 5 years ago. And I can't tell you how tiring it is to have this conversation again, because I would have thought that by now the message would have been received that it is exactly these kinds of groups that work in ways that perhaps state-based organizations don't understand, very decentralized, very amorphous, that are really the backbone of the response. You know, if you take, for example, a politician out of Sudan and plop them somewhere in the middle of the Gulf or Europe, no one's going to notice. If you take an emergency room out of commission, you will feel the impact immediately. That should be the metric that we use. So now, knowing that we have to rethink our entire ways of thinking of these kinds of groups, We need to, as Abuzar said, give them recognition, but not as implementing partners. They are not to be made into NGOs. The minute you make them into NGOs, they lose efficacy. Just like the minute you make resistance committees into a political party, they lose efficacy. They want to be part of the decision-making process. They want to be part of the planning process, and this is possible, not in a cluster environment, a UN cluster environment, because that again strips away their agency, but create ways in which their voice is loudest in a room of others. The second thing is funding. If you want more bang for your buck, and sorry to use a crude commercial term, but if you want that, then you have to make sure that these entities and these bodies, not just ERRs, but other local responders, are getting the lion's share of the money. Yes, maybe it has to go through some kind of intermediaries, INGOs or otherwise, but to make sure to earmark enough money so it's not gobbled up in overheads and other things. And the last thing is protection. Look, these people are the front line of this response. They are not part of the response, they are the response. And as first responders, they need protection, which means they need some level of recognition as aid actors, and they need to be given any and all protections that are afforded to aid deliverers, aid actors, etc. And they also need to be able to be supported to help protect others. We know that the belligerents in Sudan, and there aren't just two, have absolutely no interest in protecting civilians. That has become abundantly clear. And in that protection vacuum, these are the people that are doing it. How do we do that? The other thing is, just lastly, I would say, these are demands of the ERRs. So I'm just sort of paraphrasing. But really, I think the advocacy that is needed in a place like DC can't just happen when they're in town. It needs to be systematic, it needs to be continuous, and it doesn't just need to be in DC. But as the US often reminds us, it is the largest humanitarian donor on Sudan, and others will follow suit. If the US signals that it is willing to engage in changing some of its policies, changing some of its practices, using what it already has, such as, for example, OTI, which is very much able to give these kinds of deliver this kind of funding, perhaps not in a humanitarian context, but the mechanism is there. If the US signals it's willing to do that, others will take note. ECHO will take note. Other bilateral actors will take note. There has to be a political shift here in DC, and there is absolutely no time like the present to do that.
Sara, you've looked at this in Sudan, around the world, sitting at the head of ODI. Your counsel, your advice?
Well, the mantra of localization started with the World Humanitarian Summit, and has carried on. I personally don't particularly like the word. It's got this transitive sense, so we can localize something that is inherently local, as we're hearing. That the first responders are those who respond. We can't localize something that they do initiate. Having said that, I think it's also important that we do give credit to USAID for trying to push the envelope, because I think what the administrator is trying to do and what the colleagues are trying to do is very important, and they are trying to push other donors as well, to support what people are like our friends from the emergency rooms are doing on the ground. But the way in which this is happening, and the administrator mentioned that herself, isn't working. This level of bureaucracy, the way to get the money is not working. It's not trickling down as it's supposed to be, and it shouldn't really trickle down. We need to find way to support them more directly. So we need to think of there are networks that can be supported more directly. There are pooled funds that can be created locally. I realize completely that for a big administration it's impossible to administer a lot of very small grants, and we shouldn't, and Kholood has said that so well, try and transform these emergency rooms into an NGOs. I call them the mini-me's, that we have to create all these mini-me's for the international humanitarian community, because that's the only thing that we recognize. We need to absolutely, listen to what we're hearing from the emergency room, respect the way in which they have been able to create a very decentralized structure, to remain politically engaged, and that local legitimacy that they have, not destroy that, learn from that, and adapt. We need to adapt our bureaucracies, to be able to support that. And there have been creative efforts, as I said before, in the country. Let's build on those, let's learn from those, let's reward those who are able to support the emergency room and the other mutual aid efforts in Sudan and elsewhere more directly. And then maybe we will start to see a change in the humanitarian system, not just in Sudan but elsewhere. They can really enable assistance to be more appropriate, more relevant, to actually be assistance that supports the aspirations of people, upholds their dignity, and enables them to have hope.
Omima, the last word to you, to our colleagues who are joining us here, those who are online, those who will watch afterwards.
I just would like to state it some points out. It's important to say them. First of all, we've been asking always about the approaches of how you can do that, how we can do that, and we're very happy that you came here and share what we have. One of the basic things that we've been stating, we've been working on it as ERRs. We're trying to create an environment or a movement for Sudanese, highlighting their needs, trying to fulfill it, seeking the recognition and the trust. That's on the basic things. What we're doing is a mutual aid. We have a good coordination on the ground between each other, even between the national organizations. And we have a council that's taking care of all of that things as a ERRs. I'm told you, we're learning very fast. After 9 months of the war, we've been asking always about why we can't access to the fund. Let's speak Frankensteinly. It's always about the procedures and the policies and so on. It's one of our requirements here, just trying to move those policies a little bit, because you're not going to start from scratch. We already did this, and the numbers are there. 2 million people in Khartoum being reached with a fund below 1 million in 9 months. That's a big number. That's a shocking number, actually. So, seeking this recognition and trying to build the trust between the ERRs, because ERRs is not working by book. Everyone is scared of that. We know that. But we show the level of accountability that required for that things. And as I said, accountability to the local, not even the international level. The other thing is a coordination. When we say coordination, as I said, we're already taking care of that on the ground level. We have ERRs on all levels, and even the movement is a bottom up. There is nothing. In ERRs, we're not sitting in chairs and saying, we need food, for example, Bahri or so. No. It's always come from the ground. They see what they want. Then they communicate this to the up level. Let's say the coordination level and the representative. So we need the world just to take a look deeply at this in order to change those policies and those procedures. And the question is it by impact, or is it doing it by book regardless to the impact? That's all I'm going to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Omima. It strikes me that we're all puzzled by how to end the war, how to end the fighting, but we have a really clear example about how to support peace at this moment. So Sara, Kholood, thank you for joining us in the panel. I want to express also thanks to ODI, to Proximity International, to Vital Voices, and to CORE, and to the many people who helped to arrange the logistics to make sure that our panelists and the delegation could be here. We're all used to logistics, but I think what was done is truly heroic. So our thanks. Omima, Abuzar, and to all of those who are here from the delegation, we wish you courage, solidarity in the months to come, and thank you for making the trip. Keep telling us what it is that you need from your partners. Thank you to everybody who joined us in person and online.
Thank you for listening to this event. If you'd like to listen to more events or explore our other podcasts, visit usip.org/podcasts.